Okay, let me share again. So today I want to introduce you to JavaScript, but I was thinking what I would do. Usually I do a different thing every lesson, so I want to change a little bit. I'll start off just with the basics, how to change style for a specific element, like a box, and how to change the color and CSS attributes. And then today I want to teach you how to work with forms. For example, we want to type a password. Like any website today, you go in as an email and a password. So how would we do to, for example, there's usually a button to hide or show the password. There's also validations. How do we validate? I type some password that might be kind of weak, then I click outside and then I get an error saying that's invalid, something like that. So all of this we can do with JavaScript. Okay, so let's start off here in this environment, JSFiddle.net. Uh, you can click settings at the top right. If you don't like this layout, there's different layouts you can pick from. And then there's some settings here. I'm gonna turn off auto close HTML tags and auto close brackets because it's kind of annoying when we're starting out to learn. It's better if you manually just type that. Okay. So here we have the HTML panel where we write our document. We have the CSS panel for the style and have JavaScript here. And then you can click in the top right, sorry, top left to run, and you can see in the bottom right the result of the code. Okay, so I want to start off just making a div element, and I'm going to say hello inside, and then I'll close it. This is basically a generic container, and you can see the bottom right, there's hello. But I want to add some CSS to that. So let me add a class to this. Let's call it square, and then define in the right-hand side under CSS dot for class square. So all the elements that have the class square will have the following styles between the curly braces. And I want the width to be 100 pixels, px, the height to be 100 pixels, px, because it's a square. And then background color, I'll make it black initially. You can see it's just a black square here. Now I want to show you how we can change the CSS attributes of this element using JavaScript. You might ask, oh, why not just write in the CSS style sheet? Well, because what's the purpose of JavaScript? So today, when you go in a browser, you access a website or web app or whatever, the structure is written in HTML, hypertext markup language. And then the pretty things, the colors and all the positioning, it's all CSS, cascading style sheets. But then today we have a lot of social media interactivity in the websites, like people are clicking things, people are writing on things and interacting with the website very dynamic. So things in the document are actually changing in real time. It's not just static like the beginning of the internet where it's just text, like scientific documents. Now you can just click things around and all stuff. All right. So JavaScript is just for that. Just JavaScript is a programming language that originated in the browser. So people are looking to add dynamic interactivity to the web pages, and then they built JavaScript into the browser, and then you can write some scripts, some code that will manipulate the document, the HTML, manipulate CSS classes, and all this stuff. So that's what we got today. It has evolved so much from the beginning that it's kind of HTML and CSS kind of deviated from the original purpose of just sharing scientific documents. So they didn't expect it would be all this stuff about social media apps and interactive and all this stuff. So anyway, so in JavaScript here, let's say the moment I run this, I want to use JavaScript to change the background color of the square to red. So basically, first of all, what you have to do in JavaScript is you have to first target an element that you want to manipulate. Now, in order to do that, there are different ways. The easiest way is perhaps by getting an element by its ID attribute. So what you would do is go to the element that you want to target and just add ID. And then let's call it the dash square. So it could be any arbitrary name. And then we can go here and then say document dot get element by ID, parentheses, and you put under quotes the square. Now, what does all of this mean? So document is like an interface that through which you can ask the document to about things. For example, you can do an operation. Hey, I want to find an element in this document, and the ID is this. So this get element by ID is called a function or a method of the object document. You can think of it that way. Now you notice the first letter is lowercase of get, and then followed by element is the first letter E is uppercase, and then B and I is uppercase as well. This is called the camel case naming convention, and it's predominant throughout the JavaScript language. You're gonna see everything named like that. So make sure you're typing lowercase and uppercase accordingly because the case matters. Okay. Make sure to look at every character as you're programming. Look at every character to make sure they're the same. So here I'm going to say document dot. Now the dot means that the something on the right kind of belongs to something on the left. So this get element ID function belongs to this document interface here. So that means we're asking document for an element by the ID. Now I have to provide the ID. The way we do that is by adding arguments, and the arguments are passed in between the open and closing parentheses. So in this case, it just expects one thing, and that one thing is the name of the ID that you specify for the element. In this case, I type the dash square for the ID attribute of the div there. Now make sure it's exactly the same as that value for the ID. Now, you want to add quotes there because this is what's called a string. It's a sequence of characters. Now, if you don't have quotes in programming language, JavaScript, this means something else. It doesn't literally mean the characters that I typed. So if you want things to literally mean what you typed, you must add either double or single quote, okay? Because later on, we're going to learn about things like variables, functions, and we can use arbitrary names for them. But then if you want to refer to them, that's why we don't have the quotes in that case. But when we want to actually literally say the character T followed by H followed by E dash and so on, we need the quotes. All right, so this thing, when you call it, so when you have functions, functions are instructions the computer execute. So this is a set of instructions to get the element by ID. It will return something to give you back something, and that's something, think of it as a hook, like you're hooking this element div here. So it's like referencing that. Whenever I type this whole thing, it's giving you that hook that you can use to do whatever with the element. So, and that whatever we can just say, okay, that returns an HTML element object, uh, and the interface through which we can change the style is called a dot style here, property. So this thing is called a property. When it's not a function, it's called a property because I don't execute anything. It's just like an attribute of the object. Now the style, we can access all the CSS stuff for this specific element that was returned by the get element by ID. And I can do dot background color, and this will give me access to the background color of this element div here. Now, if I want to assign a new value, I must use an equal sign. And then on the right-hand side, it's the new value. For example, if I want it to be red, I would say under quotes, red like that. Now, make sure there's quotes, okay? Usually in programming languages, sequence of characters, make sure there's a quote. This is called a string, okay? Now, if I click run there, you're going to see immediately when the page runs that the background color of the square became red. Now, some people like adding a space before the equal sign and after the equal sign just for style. It's not necessary, but I like to always add because visually it looks better. So what's happening here is when the browser loads, reads this document, parses it, and adds the style, it then runs the JavaScript code. And the first instruction is, okay, document, please find me the element that has the ID, the square, and then it gives me back that. And then you can chain different sets of operations or change the properties. In this case, we're doing dot style. Okay, I want to access the style for this element. And for this style, I want to access the property background color. And I want to change, that is, I want to reassign a value. When you have an equal sign like this, means the value on the right will go into what's on the left, in this case, the background color. And if you notice the name of the property, it's pretty much like CSS, except we don't use dashes. In JavaScript world, it's always usually the camel case naming convention, meaning if you have two separate words for one property, just make them together, no dash, but make sure that the first letter of the following word has the first letter capitalized. Okay, any questions so far? Yeah, like I said before, the reason I'm doing this is to demonstrate that we can change and use JavaScript to change or manipulate a document. Obviously, this is a very silly example. I can just write in CSS. You're right. I'm just demonstrating to you that I can use JavaScript to manipulate anything in the document. So the CSS file will be not functioning anymore. Basically, it's being overwritten. Basically, initially the document, you don't see it, but initially the document loads with background color black for the square. And then when the JavaScript code executes, it changes it to the red color. I can demonstrate that to you briefly. There's a function in JavaScript that we can use to defer the execution of a statement. For example, if I want to load the JavaScript and wait, for example, 3 seconds before I do something, and that function is called the set time out, and you call it like this. So it's a function, meaning a set of instructions. Okay, it does something to you, an operation. And the parenthesis is the arguments. Now it's two arguments. The first is actually a function as an argument. So we can say function here. You don't know this yet. I'm just demonstrating to you. You don't have to worry about it. And then the second is how long it should take before I execute this, the milliseconds. So I'm going to put 3 seconds to demonstrate to you what's happening when I click run. So I'm going to put my statement inside that. So when I click run, you're going to see it's black. And after 3 seconds, it's going to turn red. So that demonstrates that initially the document, that square is actually black, but the JavaScript code after 3 seconds executed, and then it turned it into red. All right. Okay, great. Now I want to teach you another way of, I don't want to execute this when I run the document. I only want to change the color when I click. So remember, when you have documents, social media apps or whatever, you're doing lots of clicking, and that's actually what's called an event. So there are different kinds of events, like the mouse is hovering over something, enters an area of an element, or exits out of the element. You're pressing a key in the keyboard, you're clicking the mouse, and you're pressing a button, you're submitting a form, you're changing text in an input, and so on. So to do that, attach an event to any element, you just go to the attribute and say the name of the event, in this case, on click. So I want, when I click this square element, I want to do something. So I just add on click, double quotes, double quotes. So this is the attribute. Now the value is going to be what's called a function. So you have to give the function a name. Now the function can be any name you want. I'm just going to be descriptive and just say change color. Now I must add parentheses here so it executes the function when I call it, when I click this. Now, when you have this name change color, you got to go into JavaScript code here, break a line in the beginning. You're going to define a function. A function is a set of instructions that you can have defined, and then later you can call them, meaning you can execute them whenever you need. So let's call a function by writing the keyword function and then space the name. The name has to match the onClick, so change color. And then it needs, if necessary, you can pass parameters or arguments like input, things that it may need to process whatever job it needs to do. In this case, there's no argument, so I'm just going to put empty parentheses. But if I had any argument, I would put them within the parentheses, separated by a comma. Now I'm going to define the body of a function with curly brace open and then curly brace close. And between the open and closing curly brace is where I put all my statements, meaning whenever I need to execute these statements, I can call this function. So here I'm going to move this code to change the background color red there. So what's happening, I defined a function change color that has the instruction of changing the background color of this div to red. But the function as it's written here is just a definition. It's not executing anything. Okay, it's just there. Whenever you need to call it, hey, I need to change color. Hey, please change color. That's called a function call. And to the function call, you would say change color, the name of the function with a parenthesis like this. Okay. Now, I don't want to change the color, call the instruction right away when I load the document. I want to actually uh, make that only be called when I click the div. That's why I put the attribute on click and the name of the function here, change color with the parentheses. So when I click the div, it will call this function. That means it goes to the code. Okay, here's the definition of function. And here are the instructions. Execute one by one from the top. Okay. Let's try it. Click run. You see it's black, the square. I'm going to click the square with my mouse with the left click and see now it became red. Any questions so far? All right. So continuing, whenever you open something, maybe curly brace or open tag in HTML, we always like to add what's called indentation to the style of the code. Now, this doesn't matter for the computer. It's just for us humans to better see or read the code. So whenever you have an open curly brace, what you want to do is everything between the open and closing, you must add some space on the left-hand side. It's at least two spaces, or you can use the tab character. I like adding one, two spaces. This is called the indentation. It's very common in programming language, and you're going to see it a lot. Whenever you open a curly brace, everything between the open and closing curly brace will have two spaces to the left, at least. So that gives us like a sense of this instruction is contained within the body of this function change color. Okay. So you can go further, and if you need to change any CSS property, for example, the color of the text here, you just do the same thing. You would go, first we need to target. So document dot get element by ID. What's the ID of the element you want to target within the quotes in the parentheses? That's the dash square. Now an access dot style, and then dot the name of the property. In this case, for the text color, just color. Now, if you want to assign a new value to this, if you just say like this, it will give you the value back. In this case, it will be, I think, black by default. But if you want to assign a different value to the color, That's when the equal sign comes in. And then the right-hand side is what the new value should be. In this case, I want it to be white for the text. And then I finish off a semicolon. Now, I didn't talk about semicolon. Semicolon is kind of optional in JavaScript. You don't have to type it here, but it's just a habit from programming language, other programming languages that always require it whenever you finish off a statement. Now, most of the cases you don't need it in JavaScript, so it's up to you to add it or not. Since I've worked with other programming languages, I'm just very used to this. And in more advanced cases, it might conflict if you have a statement before this one and you don't have the semicolon, it might combine them into one and do some unexpected things. That's why I always add it. So just keep that in mind. So semicolon always finish off a statement. It's kind of the same in CSS, right? You have a semicolon after every definition of a pair of property value. Same concept. Click run. Now click there. You can see the text color change to white. Somebody asked if we want to change the color again to a different color when you click it, you add another method. Now that's a good exercise for us to do, actually. I wasn't thinking about doing that, but now that you asked, let's think about that. So every click will add a different color. So you can do that, but there's a problem. How do you know what color to add, right? So that's the big problem here. If you have just a predefined color, we can make a list of colors and then keep like shifting between them. Another way is creating a random kind of color. That might be a little bit advanced for this class, but basically it would involve you generate a random number with the math.random function, and then you use that to somehow turn into a color because colors can be built with red, green, and blue values. So you can generate random numbers for that and then build it. But anyway, easy way to do shifting is maybe let me try to explain here. So in order to understand that, we need to understand what arrays are. So I'm going to open the DevTools here by pressing F12, or you can right click and inspect. And I'm going to go to the console tab and clear everything with a trash can. Now we need to understand what arrays are and then variables. Actually, let's learn about variables first. So whenever you need to keep track of some information to use later, we use variables. Think of it like a storage. You store it somewhere so that you can reference it later. So the way you do variables is you just need a name, any name you want. For example, person's name. I just call it name. Now, to assign something, it's always equal sign. The right-hand side is the value for that. Under quotes, this would be, let's say it's John. So I define a variable name with a value that's a string, like sequence of characters, John. And then whenever I need to use that, I just reference that by the name of the variable, which is just name, right? It could be anything, but I call it name. And when I type name here and press enter, I get John back. Whenever I do that, I always get John back because that value has been saved for use later. Now, that's why I told you whenever you need to literally say the word, the characters, you need quotes, because if you don't have quotes, it would think it would be a variable that you define somewhere, right? So let's call it age and define it 47. And then whenever you say age, it's not saying the letters A, G, and E. It's actually pointing to the variable age that has stored the value 47. So whenever I say age, it's always 47. But if you want to say the word age or the characters A, G, and E, you have to add quotes. That's why I told you we need quotes for string to literally show the characters as they were typed. Okay. Now we know variables. Let's go back here. We can actually use a variable to avoid us typing the same thing twice or actually finding an element twice. You can see line 4, I'm looking for the square, and then line 5, I'm looking for the square again. So if you find yourself doing repeated actions for the same thing, that's when a variable comes in that might be a good thing to have or define. So instead of looking for the element twice, I can just do it once. So what I do is define a variable here. Now I can say, okay, let's call square element for the name of the variable. I use camel case, meaning the second word has the capitalized E, and then equal sign, whatever. Now this whatever is document.getElement by ID, the square. So what it's doing in line 4, okay, I'm going to get the element, the hook or reference to that. I'm going to store the variable square element. And then I can use it whenever I have 5 or 6, right? I have this thing here. I don't need to find it again, do the same like work to find it again. I already found it and I stored in the variable 4. So I can just use square element here, the literal name of the variable, and that will substitute this thing there. You can think of it like this thing, when it's run, it goes in there somehow. Think of that visually, but that's what it means. So you can do the same for line 6. So now this is very different from before. Before we had document get element by D twice, meaning you have to go and find the element once and then twice. Now we only do it once, and we save one operation. That's a little bit more efficient using the variable. Now, to finish off, we need to fix the syntax here. Because in JavaScript, every programming language has a syntax, meaning you have to add some sort of keyword to define a variable. Some of them don't need it. And the reason I didn't need to type that when I was doing the console is because this is like a prompt or a REPL, and we type something, get something back. But when we're writing the actual code here, you should add the const keyword before the name of the variable. So you want to define a variable that's constant, meaning it only is defined once and it doesn't need a new value later on. Now, there are different kinds of keywords. There's the let one where you can define a variable and change its value later. But for the purposes of this one, I'll make it const because I don't need to change square element to anything else. I just want it to be fixed to this get element by ID return value. Okay, now we can click run there and test it. Click there. Everything's okay. Now I got a problem because I type this thing here and it's wrong, right? So I just tested and it's not turning white for the color because I forgot to delete this. Now it's correct. If I click run, click again, we have the text turning white. So always make sure when you change your code to something else, make sure to test it. That is, run it again, verify all the conditions and the statements. That is, did the background turn red? Did the text color turn white? Ask yourself those questions as you're testing things after changing your code, because you might find bugs like I just found, right? I forgot to delete something when I was replacing the name of the variable there. So I just fixed that bug. That's what we call fixing a bug. Okay, now let's learn about arrays. Let's go back to the DevTools with F12. Now you might notice a variable can hold one value here. What if I have multiple values? Do I have to define one variable, another variable, another variable? Maybe I have a list of things, right? List of colors, for example. Yeah, you could do that, but it gets very tedious. Imagine I have 100, like, I don't know, 100 colors. I have to 100 variables. That's not so nice. So instead of doing that, we do what's called an array. So an array is a list or sequence of things. Okay, now let's define it. Let's say I have different colors, red, green, blue. Let's start off with that. So I have color red, comma, color green, comma, color blue. Now I add space between the comma and the color because for style, but you don't need it. Okay, I just like having space after punctuation. Now let's say we have these 3 colors, and the purpose of doing this is to teach you how we can shift the colors as we click, click, click multiple times. So I want to shift between red, green, and blue. So you add these square brackets in the beginning and the end of the list. And this is called an array in JavaScript. The syntax, very easy. Square brackets, separate the elements by a comma. Now, the element can be anything. It can be a number, can be a string, and other data types. Now, we only learned data type string so far, but actually you can have a number. Instead of red, I can add a 1 there. Notice the numbers don't need quotes because they're treated as numbers. We can do 1 plus 2, it's 3, and so on. I can add 1 plus 2 here. You can see the output. When I press enter, it's 3 for the first element. Element is the name of each thing in the list. So the first item is the first element. The second item is the second element, and so on. Okay, let me revert back to red, green, blue here. And let's take this and put in a variable. I'm going to call it colors equals. Now, whenever I say colors, I can get that back, right? Now, if you want to access each of these elements, you need the bracket notation on the right-hand side of the name of the array. So I can say brackets here, and then you have to give the index, or as the position of the element. Now, it starts counting from 0, so be careful. The first element is sub-0. So if I type enter, that gives me back the first element being red, because it's that index 0. Now, if you do index 1, that's the second element, that's green. If you do index 2, that's the third element, that's blue. Now you can see this is an array, and I can change the color names by changing the number, right, the index. And that's precisely the mechanism we can use here. We can start off with 0 and then go to 1, 2. Every time I click, I increase the number. So let's go back to the code here. So I'm going to define a variable outside the function. Now this value is going to be like a counter, right? Or index. Let's call it index. I started at 0, meaning the first element. Now I need to add const here, but the const, if I need to change the index later, every time I click, I want to add 1 to this. I cannot do it, so I must make it let, meaning this variable, the value can change over time. So whenever I click, it's going to call change color, and then I want to go here and say that index, the new value is going to be index plus 1, meaning initially it's 0, right? 0 plus 1 is 1, and 1 goes into the new value of index. So it keeps changing every time I click. It's going to be 1 and then 2 and 3, so on. Now, I need a list to keep going through the colors, right? So let's make a variable here called colors and an equal sign, and then brackets for array. Let's make it red, green, and blue strings. Okay. Now, when I click to change color, I want to be able to reference the array of colors to see where I'm at. Initially, I am the 0, right? So first, what I'm going to do, okay, the background color here, where I see red, you see that? I'm going to change that. Now, how do I access the element, the first element for colors? That's colors, the name of the array that holds, name of the variable that holds the array. And then brackets, now what's the index? That's 0, right? Now, if I do this one, it's always going to be red here because the first element is red. But I need to change this so that instead of being 0 there, it's going to be something that's changing over time. And that's the index variable because it holds a value that's initially 0, and then it becomes 1, and then becomes 2, and so on. So instead of 0, I put color sub-index. So click run. Let's test it out. Red, green, blue, every time I click. So it goes to red because index is 0. Color sub 0 is red. And then the second one, because of this line 8, right? So the second one would be initially green because index would be 1. And the color sub 1 is the element with string green, and then blue, and so on. Now, if I click again, something's going to happen, right? It's going to kind of break. Yeah, because there's no more elements there. So there's no, 0, 1, 2, 3. There's no 3, right? There's no more color there. Now, I leave that to you as an exercise to figure out what to do in that case. So I want to move on to just briefly talk about the form validation. But if anybody had any questions, let me know. All right, let's talk about, I don't know if I have time now that we talk about that. I just want to talk about validation of forms. Let's just have a password field like this. So let's do it. Let me make it before the code. You can ignore this code for now. Just put it down there. Let me make a label for password. I'm going to be very fast because I'm going to omit many things in HTML because we're running out of time. But input type password like that. Okay, just like that. Just comment this out here for now. Comment out is this is a comment, mean it's ignored. You can press control slash here to make it ignored or not with a comment. Okay, if I type anything there's the password. Let's add an initial value. So just we have something to, you don't have to type every time, but we would remove this later. Let's say it hello there. That's the initial password. Now, when I'll be able to go here, and I'm going to type a password, and when I go out, I want it to be validated. But before that, let's talk about the show and hide. Let's add a button here. Type button, and we're going to call it show. And if I click this button, I want the password here to be shown. But what controls this password being shown or not, right? It's this type of the input, the type attribute. If it's text, right, it shows. But if it's password, it hides. So we can manipulate this element, the input element. When I click this button, target this input, change the type to text. Now, how do you do that? Okay, first you got to go to the button. When I click the button, right, add the attribute on click to the button. Now we need to define a function for this set of instructions to do when I click show. So this would be, let's call it toggle password, about that. Then we must call it with parentheses. Now go to the JavaScript, type function, space, name, toggle password, parentheses. We don't need any arguments right now. So put curly braces, body of the function, add indentation. Now, okay, I need to target the input type password there. Well, I can do by ID. I could do by others. I could do by the element name, assuming there's only one input on the document, but that's not very good because in the real world, there's so many input elements. So there are different ways. You could add a class, but classes are usually not unique. So let me just, for the sake of demonstrating this, adding class here. Let's assume this is unique, but it's not. It couldn't be unique. I'll add JS dash password dash input. So I define this class here just for the sake of selecting this element. Now I'm going to teach you another way of finding the element that's not get element by ID. And that's called query document.query selector. Now this is nice because I can write kind of like CSS selectors here. So remember CSS, when you type dot something, it means any element that has this class. So I could just do that just here, dot JS dash password dash input. So this means, hey, document, I want you to query for one thing, meaning find this one thing with this selector, meaning, okay, any element that has the class JS password input. Now that I get this back, it will be this input. And then I can change something about that. Maybe I can change the value. Let's try that. If I say there, and I want to make it, just so you see it, just type text for now. So when I click show, you see hello changed to there? Because I changed the value of the input. With the value meaning this attribute there. Okay, just say dot value, right? And if you need to access properties or attributes on an object in JavaScript, dot something, right? The attribute here is value. In any case, I'm gonna revert that and revert my type password here. Let's try, what happens? Do you think type would do anything? Let's try. Oh, so actually you can do that. You can say dot type to be able to change the attribute type of the input. And then the right-hand side is always the new value. So we can click show there. If I click run in the top left, it will reset. So I can click show again to show to you. There you go. Now this is nice, but the show is no longer, it should be hide right now, right? How can we change the label of this button when I click show? Well, it's actually targeting itself, right? Now I'm going to teach you how you can access the thing that triggered this event. Well, when I click the button itself triggered it. So the argument to this function toggle password is actually there's an argument that you could add. It's the event argument. It gives you information about the event that just happened. This case being on click. So you can say event.target to access the thing that triggered it, meaning the button itself, and I can change the label for that button, right? In this case, I think it would be the thing between the open and closing tag, and I think that might be text content. Let's try it out. Let's make it hide. It's not working. Let's see, debug this. So how do we debug this? I see, I tried something, it doesn't work. Well, one way is very simple way is doing what's called a console log. Let's see if it works here. So you would console.log, meaning print a message to the console of event.target. What is that thing? Let's try it out. Click run. I think this one, click. Oh, you see this error in the console when I clicked? Can't access property target. Event is undefined. Oh, so it means I'm trying to access a property of something that does not exist. Is undefined. So event here is undefined. Why is that? Well, you actually have to type event here in on click value. That's something, you know, silly, but you have to type the event there. Don't ask me why, just the way it is. Now let's try again. Oh, now it's working. Okay, let me add indentation here. So we just learned how to debug with a console log. Console is basically an interface or object through which you can log or print a message to the console here. Every browser, every website, you can access the console in the DevTools console tab to debug things. And I just print out what is event.target. I was trying to figure out what that is. And it told me, okay, target was trying to be accessed with something that doesn't exist. I conclude, okay, event was not defined, so I must define it. So I actually have to put a type event there in the onClick value. That's how I figured it out. Any questions so far? Okay, let's proceed. And okay, what if I want to hide? Well, it's not working if I click. Let's close this. So usually after you debug, you can remove the console log. You don't need that anymore. I'm just gonna leave it there for the reference for you. But make sure to always remove it when you're done debugging. You don't want that in the production websites, appear console logs. Anyway, so the next time I click this, I need to figure out, okay, if it's shown, I must hide. But if it's hidden, I must show. So if I click there, I need to find a way of knowing that. But you can know that just by accessing type. That's one way. You know, there are different ways to go about this problem. One way you can just check the type of the input. If it's text, it means it's shown, so we must hide. So let's learn about doing that. Okay. So after the console log, I need to check, okay, if I go in document query selector, this input to access this input, I'm going to check the value of the type. Okay. I should say dot type to see this value. Now I must compare this, right, with something. Okay. Let me do this. Triple quotes. Sorry, triple equal sign. Now the equal sign single is to assign or attribute a value. Now, if you have double or triple, it means comparison. You're comparing left to right-hand side. Be careful of that, okay? The number of equal signs changes things totally. Now, why am I using triple? That's because JavaScript has this triple thing too. It's like stricter than double equal sign, two equal signs. So I would advise you to always start off with triple. If it doesn't work out for you, you can look about using the other one. But anyway, so what we're going to do is compare that to the string password. I can be double or single quote, doesn't matter. If the input there, the type attribute value is password, that means it's hiding it. So in that case, I would make it show, right? Which is basically what I wrote here. So I must have a condition. If this, do this. Else, if that is not true, do something else. So that's the if statement. And the syntax is if, and you put the thing in parentheses that you want to check. And then curly braces. And then you put else here like this. Let me make this bigger. So syntax is if keyword, parentheses. You don't need the space here, it's just optional. But I always like to add. And then something to that returns true or false. It's called a Boolean programming language. So this comparison here will return true or false. And then the curly braces, the statements you want to execute if this is true. But if this condition is not true, meaning false, I'm going to do whatever's in the else block between the curly braces for the else, okay? So if the input type is password, meaning it's hiding, I want to make it show. Therefore, I'm going to cut and paste the code between the open and close for the if. But if that's not the case, meaning, remember, if I click show, it changes the type to text. So if it's any other type that's not password, let's assume it's just not password, meaning is text, right? Then, okay, in that case, I must, okay, event.target.text content, I change that to what? Okay, I got to show, change the label of the button to show, and then we're going to get the input type, basically the same thing there, right? Char selector, the element has dot, meaning the class, JS dash password dash input, and then dot type, change that to password, so it's hiding it. Okay, you see the same pattern except here's show and here's password. Now if I click run, show, and click hide, it's hidden. Right? Show, hide, show, hide. Any questions so far? Okay. Now one more thing. I don't think we have time to do all the other stuff we did the first time. But let's just think about, okay, how would we make that? Let's say I type some text, right? I'm typing hello, and I click outside. I want this to be validated, meaning if it's good or not good password. So the event here is, okay, when I click an input, that means a focus event. When I click outside, it's called a blur. Focus, blur. So what I'm going to do is the input, I want to, on blur, do something. In that case, be validate. And I call this function validate. Let me make this bigger. Then you can do the same approach here. You can do function, validate, like this. Now, for the sake of time, we don't have time to do a very good solution right now. I'm just gonna assume it's invalid right now, and I would just want to change the background color to red whenever I blur. So what I want to do, okay, who's the thing that I need to change? It's the input background color. But I can access that because I have on blur here associated with the input. So if I want to access that, that's the event.target. So add event there, and then add the parameter event to the validate function. And then you can access event.target. That's the input itself, the one that triggered this event on blur. And you can see dot style, dot background color, and that's red. Then semicolon to finish it off. Click run, click there, click outside, it's red. Now, if you ask, okay, how do we actually validate? Well, you just check the value of the input. Remember, event.target is the input, and then dot value is whatever it was typed. So you can change, you can check here, okay, is the value, you can check or compare to something to see if it's invalid. Let's assume, okay, let's just do a very basic check, right? What if I don't type anything for the password? It's empty and I click outside. That's invalid, right? How do I check that? Well, you can say event.target, that's the input. Then dot value is whatever was typed. Now you can say dot length, that's the attribute of the string, meaning how many characters there are. If I don't type anything, I delete everything, there's 0 characters. So if this is the triple equals 0, if that's invalid, right? So in that case, I'm going to execute the background color, change into red, but only in that case. Otherwise, if I have typed something, right, the length is not 0. It has to be 1, 2, or 3, and so on. In that case, I'm going to say event.target.style background color. Let's change it to green. How about that? Just say, oh, you're good. And then click run. Let's try it. I'm going to delete everything, click outside, it's red. Now, if I type something, now it's green when I click outside. Okay, let me click top left run again. So if I click inside, it's valid, I mean, it's gonna check, hey, how many characters were typed? If it's not, if it's equal to 0, change background to red. Else, in this case, it's else, right? Because there's 5, I think, characters there. It's gonna change the background to green. All right. Sorry for going too fast because we're out of time, but if you have any questions, let me know. And I'll wrap this up and finish.